Get your mop, do your job, and shut your mouth.
The story begins on a calm summer night in Kansas City, as Chris drives on an empty stretch of road with his girlfriend beside him and their two friends in the back seat. They're all enjoying their prom night to the fullest, but Chris wants to make it even more memorable, so he turns off the headlights and puts the top down, allowing them to see the fireflies up close and fully appreciate the breathtaking view. However, his friends think it's too risky.
You can turn the lights back on.
Yeah, dude, come on.
They're so beautiful.
Told you, right?
Chris, please, you're freaking me out.
He finally turns them back on, but by then, it's already too late. And despite his attempts to swerve, the car crashes into a stalled harvester. 4 years pass, and the world looks different now, darker and full of consequences that never stop arriving. Chris and his girlfriend survived the crash, but the two friends in the back weren't so lucky. And the guilt of their deaths sits on Chris's chest every single day, like a weight he can't shift. The accident left Chris with severe problems, as he has anger issues and a brain that won't let him remember anything new, so he's forced to live by a notebook recording everything he needs to do. Every morning he wakes up and has to relearn his own existence from scribbled notes, and it never gets easier. It's devastating to watch someone who once had everything reduced to reading instructions on how to live each day, trapped in a cycle where tomorrow never brings relief. He attends classes at the Life Skills Center to learn basic skills, but even that is too challenging. After class, he notices he's locked the car with the keys inside, but it has happened so often that he always carries a backup key hidden in his shoes. With a remorseful heart, Chris goes to catch a glimpse of his ex-girlfriend Kelly, who lost her leg in the accident and is now walking through life with a prosthetic and 1,000 reasons to hate him. Reasons he can't argue with because he knows her hatred is justified. After that, he checks his schedule and realizes his next meeting is with Janet. But Chris starts it weirdly as he gives her an uncomfortable, long hug. She asks him about his life and if he's facing any issues, but he seems more interested in her than that. He makes a sexual remark about her, but Janet shuts him down immediately with a firm tone, as she thinks it's due to brain injuries from the accident that he has trouble with self-control. He continues to hit on her, but she tells him that she's simply there to do her job, and for that, she asks what he wants. He thinks for a moment and, with a guilty voice, tells her,
I just want to be who I was.
Chris goes home, where his blind roommate Lewis left him a voicemail with the recipe to cook dinner. But he's unable to find the tin opener, which makes him angry, and he starts throwing things in frustration. He calls Lewis, who quickly finishes his work before coming to help his friend. Chris apologizes for the mess while Lewis prepares dinner for them, and he asks Chris about school. He reveals that he was asked to write an essay on his daily routine, but he couldn't think of anything after writing, I wake up. Lewis thinks he should take it as a story, but Chris finds it difficult, so Lewis requests that he tell him a children's story starting from the end. Chris manages to do that successfully, so Lewis advises him that
you sequence just fine. You just gotta start the end, work backwards. Write that down.
Later that night, Chris goes to the bank where he works as a janitor. He wishes to become a clerk, but his boss, Mr. Tuttle, refuses, politely but firmly, as if he's already made up his mind that Chris isn't capable of anything more. During work, he plays with the mop, reliving muscle memory from a life that feels like it belonged to someone else entirely. A flashback reveals that Chris was once a highly talented hockey player, the kind of athlete people expected great things from, before the accident took all of that away and left him with this half-life instead. While Chris is busy, a car is parked across the street from the bank, and inside, a man named Gary spies on Chris. He recognizes his ex-schoolmate.
That's Chris Pratt.
But he finds it pathetic that he's working as a janitor, but he tells his friends to move forward with the plan. Later, Chris goes to a bar, failing to talk to a woman next to him because his social skills are quite clumsy. Gary arrives, and seeing how the girl is smiling at Gary's pickup line, Chris starts taking notes, but Gary interrupts him as he introduces himself as Chris's sister's classmate. When the bartender tries to take advantage of Chris, pocketing the difference, Gary steps in and makes him return Chris's money. He's charismatic, confident, everything Chris used to be and isn't anymore. And despite the asthma inhaler Gary pulls from his pocket mid-conversation, he moves through the world as if he owns everything. Gary asks him about the accident, and Chris tells him everything, so Gary encourages him that sometimes when life takes one thing, it gives back something else. While Chris can't help but feel drawn to this positive energy, Thanksgiving comes, and Chris and his friends drive out to his family's lavish home, where everyone except Chris is rich and proud of their achievements. His parents belittle him with concern disguised as concern, asking questions about his condition and his job in ways that make it clear they think he's a failure. There's something particularly cruel about the way families can destroy someone while claiming they're helping, turning love into a weapon that cuts deeper than any stranger's words ever could. Lewis accidentally brings up their idea to open a restaurant, but they think it's a joke because Chris can't do any important role there. Chris loses his temper and goes to his old room, where he's only met with nostalgia and bad memories he wouldn't want to visit. At his house, the only one whose company Chris likes is his sister, who leaves because of her child, and she gives him the message that their father is waiting for him. Chris's father plays chess with him, but he loses, reminding his father that he can no longer play that. On their way back, Lewis asks with a serious tone for Chris not to get upset, as he wishes to say something. Chris assures him he won't, so out of concern for Chris's well-being, Lewis notes to him,
I don't think you should go home anymore.
to which Chris remains silent since he knows Lewis is right. At work, Chris's friend Ted, who's a police officer, brings him some dessert, and he tells Chris how his wife is pregnant and she's always feeling warm, so he can't turn on the heating system at their house. He thinks Chris is lucky that he won't need to face that, but his remark upsets Chris, who decides to ignore it. Ted leaves, advising Chris to lock the back door. But Chris jokes that he's the one who left his car door open. The next night, Chris is back at the bar, recycling Gary's lines on another woman, trying to sound smooth and confident, the way Gary does, but his delivery is totally wrong, leaving him all embarrassed. A girl named Lovely approaches and buys him a drink on Gary's behalf. She tells him that she used to be a dancer, but now she's a receptionist at the Chamber of Commerce. She asks what he does, but he feels hesitant telling her about his job. He keeps forgetting her name, so she writes it down in his notebook so he won't forget. Gary and his girlfriend also join them, and Gary invites them to his place, where he and his girlfriend quickly get busy in the bedroom, leaving Chris and Lovely alone in the living room. She tells him how she used to watch him play hockey and had a crush on him for years, and she recounts his heroic tales from those days, but Chris once again gets too blunt and tells her about his wish to see her naked. He feels very embarrassed, but she takes it as a compliment, and they get intimate there. Later, Gary drives Chris home, and he wonders how his rich father feels about him living at such an ordinary place, but Chris tells him that he's never been there. Gary invites Chris to join them for Thanksgiving celebrations. A car comes to pick him up, but as he leaves, he encourages Chris that,
Hey, you know something? You're better than this. A lot better.
Chris enters his place, but he's unable to sneak past Lewis's nose as he smells alcohol and a woman's perfume off him. He feels very excited that his friend had a great night, so he asks about the details. Chris tells him everything about Lovely, but Lewis notices Lovely is a strange name, so Chris admits she used to be a dancer and it's her stage name. Lewis asks how they met, so Chris tells him about Gary, which makes Lewis interested because that's the first time he's heard this name. He still congratulates his friend, but deep down he knows something about this whole thing feels wrong in a way he can't quite name. Days later, Chris goes to meet Gary and Lovely at a farmhouse. But when Chris asks who owns it, they give him a vague answer. Gary introduces Chris to his other friends, and everything feels easy and right, until an old man with a walker comes into view, asking,
Oh, welcome.
Who are all these people?
Whose place is this again?
Gary tells his shady-looking uncle named Bone to handle it, and they lie to Chris that the farmhouse belongs to a friend of a friend, but even Chris can see that something here doesn't add up. Later that night, Chris wakes up and hears Gary's girlfriend talking to her child, and she knows she's working. Chris goes to the basement where the rest of the group is sitting. He notices photos of the banks pinned to a wall, blueprints, schedules, security details, and a picture of himself among them. Gary tells him that they're planning to rob a small bank, which will have lots of money as it's the harvest season. But Chris wonders why they would steal from the poor farmers. They try to convince him that they aren't stealing from the poor, but from those big farming companies who take all the profits. It's almost impressive how easily Gary twists morality into whatever shape serves his purpose, making theft sound like justice and manipulation feel like friendship. Chris notices his own picture there, and Gary tries to sugarcoat how they trapped him into joining their plan. He sits Chris down and tells him about how the world runs on money and power, and nothing else matters, and explains how Chris's father...
Your old man, he'll pay money to take care of you, but he won't give you enough money to take care of yourself. You know why not?
Chris still thinks his father would give him the money if he ever asks, so Gary asks him to go ask his father for 10 grand, which is nothing for him, but he's sure he won't do that. Gary tells him to write it down that
whoever has the money has the power.
Chris says nothing because he doesn't know what to say. As he's about to exit, Lovely stops him and they spend the night together. But as he leaves the next day, Lovely and Gary see him from the window, as she was in on their plan. Chris and Lewis meet with the financial advisor to talk about opening their restaurant, laying out their dreams and their numbers. But the advisor shakes his head as he doesn't think they have any idea what they're getting into. He feels their estimate of costs is too low, and he doesn't like anything from their idea to only serve breakfast and lunch to their menu where every dish is named after a person Lewis admires. Lewis is still hopeful, but Chris ignores him as he continues to silently see Kelly, lacking courage to talk to her directly. In the following days, Chris feels angrier at everything. But as a jacket arrives at his place with a note from Lovely saying it reminded her of him, he feels happy. That night, Chris calls his father and asks for $10,000, trying to sound calm and reasonable, explaining he wants to open a small business where he'll sharpen skates. His father says no, so he asks for just $1,000 to test. But his father turns down his request and instead asks if he's in trouble and wishes to return to their house. Chris, already angry, feels like he's begging for scraps, so he refuses and hangs up the phone. He decides right then to join the robbery because it feels like the only door left open. The only way forward that doesn't involve crawling back to his family and admitting he can't do anything on his own. Chris helps the gang with the things they need for the heist, and he even takes pictures of the vault so they can plan how to break it. Gary tells him to inform them when the money arrives, and his only job will be to make sure his friend Deputy Ted doesn't walk in while they're robbing the place, because his schedule is unpredictable and there's no way to plan around him. Lovely spends the night at Chris's place, and while he sleeps, she slips out of bed to grab some snacks from the fridge. But Lewis is already up, and he decides that it's the best time to have a conversation with her. He asks what she's doing with Chris because he refuses to believe she's serious about him. He shares his own past with her, how his bad company led him to making meth in their home lab, but he was ignorant about the harmful effects of the fumes, which led to his blindness. He tells her that he won't let Chris fall into the same trap he did, but Lovely gets defensive and angry, claiming she loves Chris. Chris hears their heated conversation, but he doesn't say anything because he doesn't know what to believe anymore. At the bank a few days later, Ted stops by to give Chris some donuts, but Chris tries to keep him away on the night of the robbery, so he fakes being hurt by Ted's display of generosity, which he pretends to feel as charity. Later that day at a restaurant, Chris picks a fight with Lewis over nothing, telling him he's embarrassed by the way Lewis flirts with waitresses, and he's planning to move out soon and get his own place. Lewis, hurt by the sudden news, asks for the check, and his sudden change in mood surprises the waitress. Elsewhere in the city, Lovely sits in the back of a cab, staring out the window at the passing streets, and she stops it to see Chris one last time before she leaves. That day before leaving, Tuttle comes to see Chris, and as he returns his card mentioning his disease, he acknowledges Chris's hard work and offers him a new job as a clerk after the holidays. Chris doesn't know what to feel, and knowing he has no one else to talk to, he calls Lewis, who thinks Chris made a mess at home. But Chris tells him that he's at the bank. However, before he can share any more details, Uncle Boone arrives with the rest of the crew. Chris tells him about his decision to sit this one out, and he assures him that he won't tell anyone about it. But Gary punches him in the stomach, telling him,
Go in there, get your mop, do your job, and shut your mouth.
Because it's too late to back out now. The robbery begins, and they start melting through the safe after cutting the camera wires. But Ted decides to pay a surprise visit, so Gary threatens Chris with a gun, asking him to behave as naturally as possible without forgetting that he has a gun behind his back. Ted tells Chris that it will be his last shift, and another officer will be replacing him because he'll be gone for his child's birth. Chris feels happy for him and apologizes for his rudeness earlier, but Ted assures him that it's all right. He knows Chris can't control himself. After Ted leaves, the safe is finally cracked, and they force Chris to bring the money out of the vault as they load it into a car, and for a moment, it seems like they might actually pull this off. But then Ted returns with donuts for his friend. They're all caught off guard with his second visit the same night, and when no one shows up, Ted notices Gary's reflection in the glass window. Gunfire erupts, deafening in the calm, peaceful night, and Ted kills 2 of the gang members instantly, while wounding Gary. As he steps closer to Gary, Chris warns him about Bone, but Ted is too focused on Gary, overwhelmed by adrenaline and fear that Uncle Bone easily shoots him in the back. Gary orders Bone to finish Ted off, and Bone does, standing over the deputy and pulling the trigger one more time. Gary flees through the back door, stealing the car they had placed the cash in. Chris tries to flee away from there, but he gets emotional as he sees flashbacks of the accident. He gets pulled over for driving without turning on his car's lights, but he breaks down, so the officer checks his card. He lets him go as he's aware of the trauma he went through, and his symptoms are also listed on the back of his card. The cop lets him go with an offer to escort him home, but Chris waves him off and drives until he's alone. He pulls over on a dark road and checks the trunk of the car, and the money is there. All of it, along with a shovel and some cement. Chris returns to his apartment, but he notices the lights are on, so he calls his friend, realizing he isn't alone. Gary threatens to kill Lewis if he doesn't return the money, but Chris reminds him of his own lesson, firmly telling him that,
I have the money, I have the power. I have the power. 6 o'clock, and Lewis better not have a mark on him.
He tells Gary that he'll pick up Lewis, and once they're safe, he'll tell them about the money. Chris goes through his notebook and comes up with a plan to kill Gary and Bone to save Lewis. He goes to his parents' house and grabs his father's gun, which he hides in one of the cash bags. He falls asleep and sees a dream where he's talking to Kelly. She forgives him, telling him that she's moved on, and he should too. Uncle Bone finds him, and they force him to give up the money, but he says he no longer remembers it. Gary checks his diary and realizes he's buried it on the same road he had the accident. They force him to dig it out, but as he sees the shoelace on the bag with the shotgun, he remembers his plan. Bone takes the other bag, telling Chris to bring the other one, but Chris comes from behind and shoots him down, saving his friend's life. Gary is in no position to fight him with his wound, and he also bleeds out while Chris stops him from getting his inhaler. Chris returns the money to the authorities and confesses his role in everything, laying it all out in detail. But the FBI doesn't believe someone with his condition could have resisted the pressure. Also, Marty had accidentally cut the telephone wire instead of the camera feed, so they can see how he was forced into helping them. He takes a loan from Mr. Tuttle, who believes in him despite everything, and he opens the restaurant with Lewis. He also sees an improvement in his classes, while his father and Mr. Tuttle become his regular customers. Chris also starts skating again, and he hopes one day Kelly will forgive him, and she'll be ready to see him again, so he can finally tell her what he's only been able to say in his dreams. Sometimes redemption isn't about erasing what you've done, but about learning to live with it while becoming someone worthy of forgiveness, even if that forgiveness never comes. Until then, he needs to carry on with his life.
And try to forgive myself. And if I can do that, maybe others will forgive me too.